Welcome to Cafe Snacks, the most wanted questions of current happenings for UPSC, SSC, and other state administrative examinations. It is OnLearn, and this is Shyam here. Let us move on to the first question. Sri Lanka has semi-presidential system. Which of the following is true about the semi-presidential form of government? A. In semi-presidential systems, there is always both a president and a prime minister. B. In such systems, the president has genuine executive authority, unlike in a parliamentary republic. But the role of a head of the government may be exercised by the prime minister. C. Government does depend on a legislative majority. The options 1, A, B, and C. 2, A only. 3, B only. 4, B and C. Let us discuss. First, on what perspective this question is being framed. Under the prelims, it comes in current events of international importance. And for mains, GS paper 2, international relations, India and its neighborhood. Now, the issue is regarding the cutting down of 13th Amendment of Constitution of the Sri Lanka island. And the backdrop is that the Mahinda Rajapakse has returned to power as a Prime Minister of Sri Lanka and his brother Gotabaya Rajapakse as the President. Now, they want to do away with national anthem, which used to be sung in the National Day of Sri Lanka since 2016 as a part of national integrity. Now, before understanding the question and the answer to that, you need to understand in detail what was going on in the civil war time of Sri Lanka and how India played an important role. The historical events begin in 1948. Now, Ceylon gains independence from the British rule dating back to the end of 18th century. Now, there was a majority of Sinhalese population and that can be traced back to the 6th century BC. And there was also a Tamil minority who have roots as far back as the 3rd century. Now, in 1956, Sinhalese is made the only official language in a series of Sinhalese nationalistic measures introduced by the government. And you also need to understand that in 1948, there was a Citizenship Act, Ceylon Citizenship Act, that debarred the Tamilians from obtaining Sri Lankan citizenship. And that is the reason why many Tamilians were deported into India. And in 1958, the riots erupt between the Sinhalese and Tamil communities that left many people dead and forced several thousand people to leave Sri Lanka, and Tamilians were relocated to north. In 1972, Ceylon became Sri Lanka. Now, a new Tamil movement is formed by V. Prabhakaran, made up mainly of university students. And in 1976, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, that is LTTE, are formed when the Tamil New Movement joins another Tamil group. Now, the concept for a separate Tamil state was first proposed by Tamil United Liberation Front or TULF. Now, in 1977, the TULF and a coalition of small parties wins the majority of seats in Tamil areas in the country's elections. But the government later bans them for advocating an independent state. And 1983 is the most important year in Sri Lankan history because it is in that year the civil wars has officially begun in Sri Lanka and it ended only in 2009. The first Ilam war is from 1983 to 87. Now in 83, ethnic tensions in the country erupt into the start of a civil war when 13 soldiers are killed in an LTT attack, sparking anti-Tamil riots in Colombo and other parts of the country. And it left many people dead and the Tamilians were made to leave Sinhalese majority areas. Now, in 1985, the first attempt at peace talks between the two sides fails. And comes the year 1987. It is in 1987 the government soldiers push LTTE fighters back to the northern city of Jaffna. And also the government signs the Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord. It is very important. It is during the time of Rajiv Gandhi and they signed the Indo-Sri Lankan Peace Accords that make several concessions to the Tamil fighters, including recognizing Tamil as an official language. Now India agrees to help keep order in the north and east of the country via a peacekeeping force. Now, India sends a peacekeeping force to Sri Lanka. In 1988, the Indian troops, they were helpless because of the violence that was escalating in the country and they left the nation. In 1991, the former Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi is assassinated. Now, it is believed to be by a member of LTT. And then one of the fierce wars took place in the Elephant Pass army base that controls the access to Jaffna Peninsula. In 1993, the Sri Lankan president Ranasinghe Premadasa is killed by LTT bomber. So both Ranasinghe Premadasa and Rajiv Gandhi both are the victims of LTT bombing. In 2000, Norway comes into the playground and they offers to act as a mediator in the peace talks. Now, human rights group estimate that during 2000, human rights groups estimate that nearly 1 million Sri Lankans are internally displaced people. In 2001, Ranil Wickremesinghe, a new star, came into the prominence in Sri Lankan politics and he becomes the prime minister on a pro-peace platform. And he is a guy who held the term of the prime minister for the last session. Now, in 2002, a ceasefire is agreed in with Norway and other countries agreeing to monitor it through Sri Lanka Monitoring Mission. Now, in 2004, another event takes place and that is the reason why the tension escalated in the last decade. Over 30,000 Sri Lankans are killed and tens of thousands left homeless by the Indian Ocean tsunami. But the problem was regarding the international aid because large amount of international aid were sent to Tamil areas or Sinhalese areas was an issue of contest. Now, Tamilians said that large amount of aid was sent to Sinhalese area, but Sinhalese said that it was sent to the Tamil area. And that escalated the tension, and the organization, that is LTTE, was finally brought down to knees in an authoritarian military program by the government of President Mahinda Rajapaksa in 2009. Now, you need to remember that after 1978, the president became more powerful and a semi-presidential form of government in Sri Lanka tended to move towards a presidential form of government or more authoritative form of government. And the reason begins from 1978 reform. After the 1978 constitutional amendment, the president was given vast power. The president may even summon, suspend, or end a legislative session and dissolve parliament any time after it has served for 1 year. And the president can choose the prime minister from the party having a majority in the parliament, and he has the power to remove the PM and other ministers. But to remove him is really difficult. Now, you need to understand about the 13th constitutional amendment that played an important role both in Sri Lanka and in Indian politics. Now, it was a result of the Indo-Lanka Accord of July 1987. It ensured a measure of power devolution to the provincial councils established to govern the 9 provinces of Sri Lanka. It led to the creation of provincial councils, assured a power-sharing arrangement to enable all 9 provinces in the country, including Sinhala majority areas, to self-govern. Now, the subjects such as education, health, agriculture, housing, land, and police are devolved to the provincial administrations, but because of restrictions on financial powers and overriding powers given to the president, the provincial administrations have not made much headway. And in particular, the provisions of the police and land have never been implemented. And the 13th Constitutional Amendment also recognized Tamil as second official language of Sri Lanka. And it was opposed ferociously by both Sinhala nationalist parties and LTT. The Sinhala nationalist parties thought that it was too much power to share with the Tamilians, while LTT deemed it too little. And it was widely perceived by the common as a hegemonic influence by India. Now, till date, the 13th Amendment represents the only constitutional provision on the settlement of the long-pending Tamil question. And that is the reason why it is important. Because it is a form of peace through which the problem in Sri Lanka can be solved. In addition to assuring a measure of devolution, it is considered part of the few significant gains since the 1980s. Now, what are the challenges that India faces? Now, India faces many challenges because of the pro-China perspective of Rajapaksas. Now, India abstained from voting on a UN Human Rights Council resolution in Geneva calling for a probe into alleged war crimes by Sri Lanka because India doesn't want to sway away Sri Lanka from Indian politics. And the Rajapaksas are pro-China. They have given the Hambantota port for the Chinese, and India is afraid that they will use it for pro-military activities. And also the Rajapakshas leased 15,000 acres of land for 99 years to China. This has been an event of contention in Delhi. And also, in order to please Sri Lanka, India announced a $50 million line of credit for security and counter-terrorism, and another $400 million for development and infrastructure projects in Sri Lanka. Now, since both the brothers Rajapakshes have came into power, they are very keen in abolishing or removing 19th Amendment of the Constitution. Now, what is 19th Amendment? Now, let us look into that. The 19th Amendment was brought in by the previous Yehapalanya government, that is a good governance government of the United National Front of President Maithripala Sirisena and Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. The names are not just important in a UPSC perspective or SSC perspective. It rolled back the 18th Amendment that had been brought in by the preceding President Mahinda Rajapakse. Now, what is 18th Amendment? It gave many powers to the president. It gave an authoritarian type of hegemonic power to the president. That means it had removed the two-term bar on running for the office, and the president may run for any number of time as he please. That was the provision of 18th Amendment, and centralized more powers in the hands of president. And 19th Amendment done away with 18th Amendment, and that is the reason why the new Rajapakse government need to replace 19th Amendment and to get it replaced with 20th Amendment in favor of. So, the answer is A, B and C. 1. 1 is the right answer because all are features of semi-presidential form of government. Now, let us move on to the next question. With respect to GST, which of the following are incorrect? A. The Constitution 101st Amendment Act 2016 was a law which created the indirect tax umbrella of GST. B. The states would receive SGST, that is state GST component of the GST, and a share of the IGST, integrated GST, and revenue shortfalls arising from sudden change to the new indirect taxes regime collected through GST compensation fund for a period of 5 years that is set to end in 2022. See, the mechanism for GST compensation fund is in section 7 of the GST Compensation to States Act 2017, and it is done annually by projecting a revenue assumption based on 14% year-on-year growth from the base years. That is, the base year is 2015 to 2016. Now, the options are 1, A, B and C, 2A and C, 3A only, 4 none. You need to discuss about the GST. Now, why this particular question? Because it comes in prelims part of economy and it mains as part of GS paper 3 economy. The backdrop is that the 41st meeting of the GST Council was held in August 27, and the singular agenda that they were looking for was for finding a solution to the question of how best to ensure the compensation payable to the state as a part of implementation of the goods and service tax. Now, at the meeting, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman stated that the GST compensation fund was projected to face a shortfall of about 2.35 lakh crore at the end of the current financial year, and the solution that was suggested by the center was 2 borrowing options. These 2 borrowing options are not going to be discussed because the state has not yet adopted these options, so it is out of UPSC perspective. Now, you need to understand about GST. Now, the genesis of introduction of GST in the country was laid down in the historic budget speech of 20th February 2006, wherein the finance minister laid down that 2010 will be a date at which it will be implemented. And as a part in 2014, there was an introduction of Constitution Bill in the Parliament, that is 122nd Amendment. You need to consider the fact that 122nd Amendment is associated with the bill that is being implemented or passed in the House in 2014, and that is not regarding the Act. The amendment of the Act is 101. That is to be remembered, and that will help you in answering the question. Now, why GST? You need to understand why GST. Because to answer this question, it is important to understand that there was a lot of indirect taxes in the country, and the indirect tax structure in the country was leading to an economic peril. Now, presently the central government levies, it is said presently because I have taken this article from the GST portal. So, all the things that are going to be discussed as happened previously, and it is all about indirect taxes. So, usually the central government used to levy tax on manufacture, that is central excise duty, then provision of services, that is service tax, then there were interstate sales of goods, that is CST, then there was state government who was levying taxes on retail sales, that is VAT, then there was entry of goods in the state tax, luxury tax, purchase tax, etc. Now it is clear that there is multiplicities of taxes that was going on in the country. And you need to understand that there was a cascading effect of taxes. That means there was a tax on tax. So taxes levied by the central government are not available as set off against taxes being levied by the state governments. That means they were levying taxes on the same item in the parallel supply chain. Even certain taxes levied by state governments are not allowed as set off for payment of other taxes being levied by them. So even the state government is taxing multiple times on the same item. Now further, a variety of VAT laws in the country with disparate tax rates and dissimilar tax practices divides the country into separate economic spheres, and that is one of the reasons why GST was implemented. The other reason is that creation of tariff and non-tariff barriers such as octroi, entry tax, checkposts, etc. hinder the free flow of trade throughout the country. So there was a frictionless movement of taxes after implementation of GST. That need to be remembered. Now let us go deep into GST. Now there are certain points about GST. That is, all taxes mentioned earlier, that means all the early indirect taxes, were subsumed in a single tax called GST, that is goods and services tax, and which will be levied on supply of goods, which is already levied on supply of goods or services, or both at each stage of supply chain, starting from manufacture or import until the last retail level. That means you need to understand that GST is a destination based consumption tax. So wherever there is consumption, there is GST. And also GST is proposed to be a dual levy where central government will levy and collect central GST, and the state will levy and collect state GST on intra-state supply of goods or services. The center will also levy and collect integrated GST or interstate supply of goods or services. Thus, GST is an unifier that is going to integrate various taxes being levied by the center and the state. Now, this tax reform will lead to creation of a single national market, and that is the reason, or that is the importance of GST, and also a common tax base and common tax laws for the center and states. Another very significant feature of GST will be that there will be input tax credit, because GST is a dual levy, so both central government and state government is also collecting tax. So when there is input tax credit, there will not be any burden on the consumer. That too need to be remembered. And consider these particular statements. Here, two statements are very important. That means, look at this statement. To compensate states for 5 years for loss of revenue due to implementation of GST, the base year for the revenue of state would be 2015-16. So the statement, third statement, that is C statement given in the question is right. It is 2015 and 16. And a fixed growth rate of 14% will be applied to it. That means year-on-year growth rate of 14% will be applied to it. That too need to be remembered. And look at this particular statement here. The adoption of 4 slabs tax rate structure of 5%, 12%, 18% and 28%. That means our nation is now rightly divided into 4 slabs tax rate, that is 5%, 12%, 18% and 28%. In addition, there would be a category of exempt goods, and further cess would be levied on certain goods such as luxury cars, aerated drinks, pan masala and tobacco products over and above the rate of 28% for payment of compensation to the states. Now, when the states are implementing GST, there will be a loss of revenue for the states, and that will be compensated through a compensation cess, that is also known as GST compensation fund. Now, this GST compensation fund will be obtained by taxing luxury goods and sin goods, and that too need to be remembered. Let us go back and find the right answer. So, which of the following statements are incorrect? So, you know that all the 3 statements are correct. So, none is the answer. 4. None of the above statements are incorrect. That is, the Constitution 101st Amendment Act 2016 was the law which created the indirect tax umbrella of GST, and the states would receive every kind of GST, and the end date for the compensation fund would be 2022. And C, the mechanism for GST compensation fund is in section 7 of the GST Act 2017. Let us move on to the next question. Ease of Doing Business Index is passed by A, UNEP, United Nations Environment Program, B, WTO, World Trade Organization, C, WEF, World Economic Forum, D, World Bank. Now, the answer is World Bank. D. Let us discuss about Business Reform Action Plan. And that is a backdrop, and that is the reason why this particular question is being added. And it comes under prelims portion of economics and also GS paper 3 economy, basically economic policy. Now, here only this particular paragraph is important. That is, ranking of states based on the implementation of Business Reform Action Plan started in the year 2015. So, Business Reform Action Plan is a plan that is being implemented in order to improve the ranking of India in ease of doing business. That is being published by World Bank. So, the business report is published by World Bank, and Ease of Doing Business Index is a part of that particular report. Now, India is trying very hard to implement business reforms, and it started in 2015. And till date, state rankings have been released for the years 2015, 2016, 2017 to 18. The Business Reform Action Plan 2018-19 includes about 180 reform points and covering 12 business regulatory areas. And you need to recognize these 12 business regulatory areas because it can be asked as question. Now, the areas are access to information, single window system, labor, environment, etc. And the 12 business regulatory areas will be discussed later. Now, the larger objective of attracting investments and increasing ease of doing business in each state was sought to be achieved by introducing an element of healthy competition through a system of ranking states based on their performance in implementation of Business Reform Action Plan. So, India implemented the Business Reform Action Plan where there will be cooperative federalism and also competitive federalism among the states. And the ranking this time gives full weightage to the feedback from over 30,000 respondents at the ground level. So there is also some kind of community participation. Now let us discuss about Ease of Doing Business Index. Now, Ease of Doing Business Index is a ranking system that is established by World Bank Group. Now, EODB Index, the higher the ranking, indicate better, usually simpler regulation for businesses and stronger protection of proprietary rights or property rights. Now, the research presents data for 190 economies and aggregates information from 10 areas of business regulation. Now, this 10 area of business regulation is being included in the 12 business regulatory areas that India has adopted in the Business Reform Action Plan. So, let us look into the 10 areas. The 10 areas are: first one, starting a business; 2, dealing with construction permits; 3, getting electricity; 4, registering property; 5, getting credit; 6, protecting minority investors; 7, paying taxes; 8, trading across borders; 9, enforcing contracts; 10, resolving insolvency. All these 10 need to be recognized. Now, what is the situation of India currently in ease of doing business rank? Now, you need to understand that among chosen 190 countries, India ranks 63rd in doing business 2020, World Bank report. So, in 2014, the government of India launched an ambitious program of regulatory reforms aimed at making it easier to do business in India. And the efforts done well. And the efforts have yielded substantial result, with India jumping 79 places in doing business ranking since 2014. Now, the positive changes have led to this impressive improvement in India's ranking in EODB index. Now, which are the areas that have improved drastically? One is construction permits. India's ranking on this parameter has improved from 184 in 2014 to 27 in 2019. Another is getting electricity. India's ranking on this parameter has improved from 137 in 2014 to 22nd in 2019. So the ranking are not much important, but the areas which improved are to be recognized. And also, apart from these significant improvements among 190 economies, India ranks 30th in protecting minority investors and 25th in getting credit. That too is good. Getting credit and protecting minority investors are areas in which India is excelling. So, as you know, the answer is World Bank. Let us move on to the next question. Bradykinin storm is associated with A. SARS, that is severe acute respiratory syndrome, B. COVID-19, C. Lung cancer, D. Asthma. Let us discuss about bradykinin storm. Now, this comes in the prelims part of Science and Technology, and in mains it is a part of GS paper 3 Science and Technology portion. Now, why? What is the backdrop? Scientists are still trying to understand the causes for the rapid deterioration in some patients with COVID-19. And a supercomputer recent analysis of the data on the contents that is collected earlier from lungs of the patients with the COVID-19 infection showed that a phenomena called bradykinin storm. So you need to understand what is bradykinin storm. Now, bradykinin is a compound that is related to pain sensation and lowering blood pressure in the human body. According to the researchers, SARS-CoV-2 uses a human enzyme called ACE2, like a Trojan horse, to sneak into the cells of its host. So ACE2 is used like a Trojan horse by SARS in order to enter into the respiratory parts. Now, ACE2 lowers blood pressure in human body. That is an important information, and works against another enzyme called ACE. So ACE2 works against ACE, and ACE has the opposite effect of increasing blood pressure. Now, the analysis further found that the virus caused the levels of ACE to fall in the lungs and consequently pushed up the levels of ACE2. As a chain reaction, this increases the levels of the molecule bradykinin in cells, causing a bradykinin storm. Now, bradykinin causes the blood vessels to expand and become leaky, leading to swelling of the surrounding tissue. That means there is lowering of pressure and the blood vessels become leaky. In addition, the levels of a substance called hyaluronic acid, which can absorb more than 1,000 times its own weight in water to form hydrogel, increased. That means, in effect, bradykinin storm induced leakage of fluid into the lungs combined with excessive hyaluronic acid would likely result in jello-like substance that is preventing oxygen uptake, and that will severely affect the COVID-19 patients. So, you know, the answer is COVID-19. Bradykinin storm is associated with COVID-19. Let us move. Which of the following statements is correct? A. ICJ, that is International Court of Justice, investigates and where warranted tries individuals charged with the gravest crimes of concern to the international community: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crime of aggression. B. It is governed by. It means ICJ is governed by an international treaty called the Rome Statute. The options are 1, A and B, 2, A only, 3, B only, 4, none. So you need to find which of the following statements are correct. Let us discuss. Now, in prelims aspective, it is a part of international importance. It is an event of international importance, and mains GS2, it comes under international organization. Now, what is the backdrop? ICC has ordered an investigation into alleged human rights violation by US troops in Afghan since 2003. Now, you need to understand what is ICC first and later ICJ. Only then you can answer that question. What is ICC? International Criminal Court investigates and where warranted tries individuals charged with the gravest crimes of concern to the international community: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes of aggression. So ICC is concerned with all these things. So you know that ICJ is not concerned. So the first statement is wrong. And also, ICC is participating in a global fight to end impunity, and through international criminal justice, the court aims to hold those responsible accountable for their crimes and to help prevent these crimes from happening again. And you need to understand that the court cannot reach these goals alone. As a court of last resort, it seeks to complement, not replace, national courts. And it is governed by an international treaty called the Rome Statute. The ICC is world's first permanent international criminal court. So it is governed by Rome Statute. So you know the second statement is also wrong. ICJ is not governed by Rome Statute. It is ICC. So what is ICJ? And the answer here is none. None of the above statements are correct. So you need to understand about ICJ. Now, ICJ is an essential and important part of United Nations. It is the principal judicial organ of United Nations. It was established in June 1945 by Charter of the United Nations and began work in April 1946. The seat of the court is at the Peace Palace in Hague. You need to remember that both ICC and ICJ are headquartered at Hague. Now, of the principal organs of the United Nations, it is the only one not located in New York. That is an important point. Now, the court's role is to settle in accordance with international law, legal disputes submitted to it by states, and to give advisory opinions on legal questions referred to it by authorized United Nations organs and specialized agency. So, it is a 15-judge composed court. And you need to understand that it was formed in 1945 and it deals with international law and not with genocide and other kinds of war crimes. But ICC deals with war crimes. And ICC was formed in 2002. That you need to be remembered. So that's all for today. Do learn and thank you.